The Seventh Guest novel is very close to what the video game story is. They had to make a few kind of necessary changes just because of the way the video game tells its story and how that wouldn't really work with the novel, and it does create a little bit of confusion at the end. At least I was a little bit confused. I hadn't played the video game before, so I didn't really know about the twist ending to it. Reading about it here is kind of awkward. The book kind of jumps around a lot in the first few chapters. Every character gets their own point of view, and they explain their motivations and kind of why they got, or why they believe they got, an invitation to go to Stoff's house. We also spend a lot of time learning about Henry Stoff. Much of this is done very differently in the video game because they're two different storytelling mediums. So there are a total of 8 main characters in this book. There are a few side characters, but they're really not important to what's going on. So we've got Henry Stoff. He is the wealthy toy maker who is kind of following the orders of some evil entity. In the book, it's called the Voices. In the game, it's called something else. Then we have Julia Henney. She is a middle-aged woman who's an alcoholic. Then we've got Brian Dutton. He is a ruthless businessman. Henry Temple, he's a retired magician. Edward Knox and his wife Eleanor, they're pretty nice people. Eleanor is the one who I really wanted to see come out on the other side better off than what she came in as. And Henry is a gambling addict. Then we've got Martine Burden. She is a gold-digging socialite. And finally we have Tad. He's some kid who got dared to enter into the house. We learn that all of the characters were manipulated into going to this house, regardless of, what they think happened. Even Tad, it's a little strange how he ends up there. The story starts off with Stoff as a drifter, and he talks about robbing stores, begging for money, and at some point he was beaten up by the police for something. This story takes place in the 1920s and 1930s, so yeah, a lot of the more modern stuff is not going to be in here. Eventually, Stoff kills a woman, and the voices tell him to do it, and then he finds a knife and starts making toys. All of this is spread throughout the first 10 chapters because it's not just focusing on him. We still need to introduce all the other characters. The rest of the book plays out pretty much how the game does. You have the characters moving around, solving puzzles, and trying to figure out why they're all there and where Stoff actually is. And then people start getting killed off. So we've got Henry Temple, who gets strangled to death. Then we've got Brian Dutton, who gets stabbed to death by Edward. Edward, thankfully, Stoff explains how he died, because I had no frickin' idea what happened to him. It's just, he gets thrown up against a wall, then he's gone. So he got his back broke, and that somehow kills him. It's kind of a weird story, and I don't understand that part of the book. Eleanor gets turned into a doll, and that's when I think the drugs kicked in, and the story just sort of goes off the rails, and it stops being kind of somewhat grounded in reality. So she's not really dead, she just happens to be a doll. Then Julia Henney gets sucked into the floor after Stoff spits some green liquid at her, and yeah, she gets killed that way. Martine Burton, I have absolutely no idea what happened to her. She is dead, but I really just don't know what happened. Stoff says that she died at the same time as Edward, and the book gives you a description, but I didn't really pick up on what was going on with her. She's just dead, and that's kind of the end of it. Thankfully, Stoff does go through everybody's death and kind of explains it to you a little bit, or tries to explain it to you, but yeah, it's a little weird. And then we have Tad. At the end of the book, Tad gets saved by future Tad. This just sort of comes out of frickin' nowhere. It's kind of interesting, but it ties into how the video game plays out. It's it's weird. I don't really know how I feel about it. It makes a lot more sense in the video game than it does in the novel, because the novel doesn't really establish everything that it probably should have. It feels like it's more of a grounded story that has something to do with reality, but then it just sort of turns into this weird magic, mystic arts type thing that I don't really understand too well. Anyway, Stoff gets defeated, and that's the end of it. There really aren't too many differences between the book and the game. The character motivations and backstories are a little different, and the biggest difference I noticed was that Future Tad actually narrates the entire game, and the entity is given a name in the game, where in the book it's not. It's just called the Voices. The deaths in the game are probably a lot more satisfying because, reading about them isn't all that great in the book. There were times when I just didn't know what happened to someone. The game does a better job of just explaining what's going on. It really wasn't made too clear to me what was happening at some points in the book. For much of the middle, 100 pages, I thought Stoff was just kind of playing tricks on the guests. He does mention a few times that he's going to kill them, but it just doesn't seem like anything's really going to hurt them. I just couldn't see that from reading the first, the middle 100 pages of this book. It just didn't quite make a whole lot of sense. It does turn out that he has magical powers that are given to him by this dark entity, so that's kind of cool. And I guess that is alluded to with a lot of the kids dying from playing with his toys, but it's just a little strange when you're reading it, and it's probably explained a lot better through kind of more of a visual storytelling medium than it is through just reading it on a page. While this is a pretty faithful adaptation of the game, it would have been nicer if some things had been better explained. In the end, Stoff turns into this weird monster, and then Future Tad shows up to save the day, and this all just kind of comes out of nowhere, because it's not really obvious that Stoff has all of these magical powers, and if he does, why didn't he just, kill them from the very beginning? I guess he wanted to torture them to make their deaths more, I don't know how to really say this. I guess more meaningful, closer to how those people actually were in real life, but that doesn't really come across in the book. It's a little strange. I do know that the game plays out very similar to how the book does, but Future's Tad is not really established until the last 20 to 30 pages of the book. In the game, he's there the entire time. This kind of shows the difference between the two storytelling mediums. You have something in a video game that can be sort of explained over the course of playing the game, but in the book, it just sort of comes out of nowhere. You've got this weird point of view where the person never says their name. They have a conversation with Eleanor, and she apparently knows who he is, but the reader doesn't. And then the guy's like, I'm here to save everything, and runs off, and then it's kind of this anticlimactic thing where everything's wrapped up in a nice little package, and then the book's over. I can't fault the authors for that. They were just trying to take something that probably shouldn't have been a book and turn it into a book. So, yeah, it's just kind of weird when you sit down and you read it. It is a nice novel. I did like it, but there's probably something else that could have been done with the ending. This is a pretty fun book. Aside from the ending, I really enjoyed it. The characters are great, the story is very good, and I did kind of like learning about these different people. The story for the video game is kind of harder to turn into a book than you might think. Not having a Future Tad be the narrator and kind of jumping around through perspectives was a little odd, and it made his appearance at the end of the book very strange. I've already kind of talked about a lot of this, but it was probably the one thing I did not like about the book, is how the ending just sort of comes out of nowhere. I wish a few of the deaths had been a little bit more clear, because as it was, I was just sort of like, oh, okay, that person's just kind of gone. Because some people, their deaths are explained quite well, and then in others it's like, oh, okay, I guess they're just not going to be in the story anymore. Brian Dutton's death was very strange, because he gets stabbed a bunch of times, and you think, okay, well, he's dead, and then he has like a point of view where he does a little bit more character development and then dies. So that was kind of strange. I don't really know why. I guess they wanted to give some closure to his story before he's just gone from the book. I completely lost track of Julia throughout the entire book. Just 1 minute she's in the kitchen doing something, and then she's gone until like the very end, where she magically becomes important again. It was just really weird. Where I'm reading along, and literally in my notes it says, "What happened to Julia?" And then I go back to reading, and she pops up to be a bigger part of the ending than what I was expecting. It's not really the author's fault. They had a pretty rough task of dealing with this one, and I think they did a pretty good job with it. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.